Okay, here we are in our first lesson. We're going to look at Microsoft Excel, cells, and worksheets. So I'm going to go through this pretty fast. I'm going to go as fast as I feel comfortable. I'm going to let you go back and pause and rewind if you feel like I went through something a little bit too quickly. So here I've opened 01-Cells and sheets.xlsx. And I've got this text box with the instructions. So I'm going to just go through these instructions top to bottom. So first I want to delete column A. I can see I've got no data in here. And so I'm just going to get rid of it because it's taking up space that I don't need. So there's a couple of ways that I can do that. I like to highlight a column. You can right click on it and choose delete. That'll delete your column just fine. You can see everything move to the left. That works well. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. There's another way that you can do this also. Over here under cells, I can click on this down arrow in the delete, and I can choose delete sheet columns. It's going to delete whatever I have selected. So there, I only had one column selected. I can delete multiple columns if I need to. So that's done. Okay, so I've got a registration number column here. I've got 1 and 2. Now I just want to make this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way down this entire worksheet. So that could be a lot of work if I'm just going to type it out. Don't type it out. Don't do that. Microsoft Excel is really good at finding patterns. So I'm going to select these first two cells, and you can see I've got this these pop-ups come up saying, hey, maybe it's finding a pattern here for you. We're going to just ignore that little pop-up for right now. What we want is this fill handle right here. There's two ways I can fill this column. I can just click and drag all the way down, and you can see there's a little preview of the number, 14, 15, 16, 17. So I know it's working. I know it's doing what I want it to do. So I'm going to come down to the last row, deselect, and it's entered all those numbers for me. So if I highlight one of these cells, it's just going to be a number. It's not a formula, anything fancy. Essentially, Microsoft Excel just did all that for us. So I'm going to undo that. This time I'm going to click the undo button. I hardly ever click the undo button. I always do Control Z. I like the keyboard shortcuts personally. Another way I can autofill this, I can select those first two values, and I can just double click. Make sure that your mouse is hovered over that little square in that column. Double click, magically. Excel will go down, fill it until it reaches the end of the list. It finds a blank value on row 53 right next to column A, so it knows to stop there. Two methods that work really well. We're going to use that fill feature quite a bit in the course, so it's good to get used to it. Now, step 3, format the numbers appropriately. Okay, so what's appropriate? So let's take a look at these numbers. All right, test your skills. If we look at this, it's in dollars. This shouldn't be in dollars. This is like a grade book, so there's no money for grades, unfortunately. You can't bribe me. This is not the amount of money you need to pay me in order to pass. I don't want dollar signs there. So I'm going to use the comma style to get rid of that dollar sign. And I've got two decimal places, but I don't have any decimals in there. So I want to get rid of those because they don't give me any helpful information. So I'm going to decrease decimal twice, so I just have whole numbers there. I like the way that looks. Now, if I want to format everything else the same, I can just manually select the cells and do that same formatting. So I can hit the comma, go back up, decrease my decimal. Okay, that works. Now I've got this range of cells selected. It's looking the way I want it. I can use the format painter for this total. I want to do that. So I'm going to click Format Painter. Whatever I click next, Microsoft Excel is going to apply that same formatting. So I'm going to click on the top cell in total, and magically everything matches. So that's a good way of helping automate this cell formatting. So I think that format makes sense. So I need to resize the columns as appropriate. Again, there's lots of ways to do all of these things in Microsoft Excel. I can see here in column A, registration numbers getting cut off. If I just double click this line between column A and column B, it's going to resize column A and it's going to auto fit the contents. So that's as skinny as Excel can make the column while still fitting all of that data. I can go through, I can manually drag the column width if I want to. Let's take a look at register date. We see a bunch of pound symbols. Microsoft is going to put a pound symbol in the cell if Excel cannot represent all of the data. It's basically showing that something is cut off. So if I make this a little bit bigger, some of the shorter dates will show up. And if I make it even longer, the longer dates start to show up. Those, Monday, August 13th, that's a long date, so it takes a lot of space. If I double click, Excel's gonna just resize it to the biggest value in that column. So I'm just gonna go through, I can go just double click on these cells and everything's going to be fit appropriately. Total might be a little bit small. It's fine. I might make this a little bit bigger. All that's fine. It says, wrap the text of the column headers as appropriate. So this is a judgment call. Does this look good? Let's look at this practice problems column, for example. Here I've got the header is very wide, but the data is actually very skinny. So this might be an opportunity for me to save some space by wrapping this text. By default, text is not wrapped. It just gets cut off if I make this too small. Here, because this contains text, Microsoft Excel just cuts the text off. If it's a date, the date values, that's where Microsoft gives us those pound symbols. So let's take a look at this practice problems. I can click the wrap text button, and if the text is too long to fit in the cell, it'll wrap it by putting it on the new line. So now if I double click that column again, this column takes up a lot less space. So I can fit more columns on my screen, so that can be a good thing. So I'm going to wrap the text for test your skills also. That looks good to me. I'm going to highlight those two cells. I'm going to right click this time and choose Format Cells. In the Alignment tab, I can check to wrap text. That's another way to format. Do the same thing as clicking that wrap text button. So I can make these smaller so I can fit more data on my screen. So that looks good. I might wrap these as well. Sure, let's do it. We've got a lot of space here. So I'm going to wrap that text and I'll resize it. That's fine. That's fine. Everything is fine. Okay, so we wrap the text. Freeze panes in a place that makes sense. So this is a really cool feature. It's important to know how it works because it's not that hard to use once you know how it works, but it's easy to mess up. So I'm going to change my view. I'm going to go to View, and I am going to select cell D3. So that's to the right of the student last name and below my header rows. When I hit this freeze panes, I've got a few options. I can freeze panes, freeze the top row, freeze the first column. The freeze top row and freeze first column are shortcuts for very common use cases, but these actually wouldn't be very useful for me right now. I hardly ever use these two features. I virtually always use this freeze panes button. What it does, it freezes whatever is above your currently selected cell and to the left. So it freezes above and to the left. That's all you got to remember. So when I click freeze here, you can see some dark gray lines show up showing what is frozen. So those cells are going to be visible. So if I scroll down, for example, I froze the first 2 rows. So I'm always going to be able to see my header row. And if I scroll to the right, I'll be able to see all of the student names. So that's data. If I have a ton of columns in my worksheet or lots and lots of rows, freezing the cells can be very useful. I can unfreeze them now if I wanted to, but I want to keep them frozen. All right, next, merge and center the summary cell across the columns for practice problems, test your skills, and exams. Okay, so this summary applies to these 3 columns. So I can highlight summary and the next 2 cells to the right. I'm going to come to the Home tab again, and I want to click the Merge and Center button. And now those 3 cells became 1 cell. So if I click off and click back on that summary cell, you can see that it spans 3 columns. I've got F, G, and H highlighted. Now the next task says to format the column headers as appropriate. This is a judgment call. You know, bolding the column headers works pretty well. Notice a couple of things. Here we've got register date, which is left aligned, and I've got all of these dates, which are right aligned. I want to right align those so it lines up, so it looks the same. Again, looking at all these practice problems, they are all left aligned, but my data is right aligned. It should match up. Use centering sparingly. Oh, I also need to span this detail across all these. I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, that looks good. If I look at this register date formatting, it's taking up a whole lot of space. Maybe I don't really care about the day of the week that people registered for this course, so I might want to change that. So I'm going to select all of those dates. So the way I did that, I'm going to select the first date in this column. Hold down the Shift key. While I'm still holding down the Shift key, I'm going to tap End and release. So I'm still holding Shift, and I'm going to hit the down arrow and release. What Microsoft Excel does there, it basically goes down that entire column until it hits a blank value and it stops. So that's an easy way to select a range. So again, I'm holding down Shift, and I'm going to keep Shift until the whole selection is complete. Tap and release End, tap and release down. And then I let go of Shift, and I've got all of those dates selected. So I can right click and go to Format Cells. It's going to format everything that's highlighted. And I'm going to come to Number here. I'm going to choose, it's a date type, but I've got a lot of different options for how I want to display this date. Now, if everyone's registering the same year, I don't care about the year. Maybe I just care about the day and the month. So I'll select this particular value. There's a lot that you can choose from. There's not a right or wrong answer. That's just what I'm going to select. Click OK, and now that register date is a lot more compact, so I can go ahead and resize that column again, and so I can fit more data right in here. Now maybe for this spreadsheet I don't want to print everything. Maybe I don't care about all these practice problem individual scores. I only care about the summary information. So to set the print area for this registration ID through the total, I'm just going to select registration number. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to hit the right arrow key several times to select that range. Now I'm going to use my shortcut again. End down. Automatically selects all that. Alternatively, I could go to the end, hit that last cell, drag up, does the same thing. I like the keyboard. When you're dragging down, sometimes there's a tendency you can get lost. You can go very far, and all of a sudden, like, where the heck, you lose your place. Generally speaking, if you need to select a big range, I like to start from the bottom and go up because you're limited by the top of your spreadsheet. That's just a little tip I find useful. Now, this is the only data I want to print. I'm going to go to page layout, and there's the print area. I'm going to set print area. So if I go to file and I go to print this, it's only going to show the information that I selected, which isn't fitting on one sheet right now. So I can scale it to fit on one sheet. It's just a little bit too big. Looks like maybe did I forget to select my total? I think I did forget to select my total. So I'm gonna redo that. Print area, set print area. Now if I go to file, print, yeah, my total's showing up there. So I'm fitting it to one page. Looks pretty good, I would say. Looks okay. It's not too small, fairly evenly spread out, readable, so I'm happy with that. Now let's assume that I don't want to scale this, I just want to print it out the real size, let's say. I can, but I want my headers row to repeat on every page so I know what all that data actually means. I can click print titles, rows to repeat at top. I'm going to select in there. If I hit this up arrow, it'll allow me to select something. If I click on row 2, it'll fill that in for me. So I'll click this to bring me back to that box. That looks good. I'll try print preview now. And so I've got scaling to no scaling. So you can see now it's 4 pages. It's couple pages wide, a couple pages tall. But you can see once I go from page 1 to page 2, I've still got those header cells printed on every page, which is good. It's going to make my printout make a lot more sense. So does the spreadsheet look professional? Well, it's kind of a judgment call. I don't like how this registration number is so wide. I'm going to make that shorter, make it fit a little bit more data, a little bit nicer. Maybe I'll make this wrap so I can make this even smaller. Maybe I don't want to say student first name. I'll just call it first name and last name. Register date. Oh, that's fine. This row is actually bigger than it needs to be now because I don't have data on 3 lines. So I can make it smaller. That's looking better. I'd say it's looking fine. I'll align all of these so that the data lines up with the column header. But overall, I'd say this is pretty good. So again, if I go to File and Print, I'm going to scale this. All columns on one page will be kind of the minimal scaling. Now I'm going to have just 2 pages. First 46 rows of data on that first sheet, and then the last rows of data on the second sheet. So it's important to make your worksheet look good. They should look professional. Take some time to do some formatting. If you don't format your spreadsheet appropriately, people are going to think that maybe the underlying data, you might have problems with your calculations. It just doesn't look as good. It just doesn't look as professional. So take some time to, spruce up your spreadsheet just a little bit. You typically don't have to go pretty crazy. The data is the stuff that matters the most, but make it readable, make it presentable.